What if I told you that a young woman's murder went unsolved for over 4 decades, despite multiple witnesses and undeniable evidence? On the night of January 15th, 1980, a young woman ran for her life. Covered in blood and mud, Barbara Mae Tucker, a college student, was seen desperately trying to flag down help near the campus of Mt. Hood Community College. But no one stopped. No one thought anything of it. The next morning, her lifeless body was found, beaten to death, her dreams and future tragically stolen in the span of a few hours. Barbara Mae Tucker, born on February 25, 1960, in Portland, Oregon, was a young woman with a bright future ahead of her. Known as Barbie and Bobby to those closest to her, she was someone who stood out in any crowd. Described as vibrant and outgoing, Barbara had a way of lighting up a room with her infectious personality. She was almost 6 feet tall, a striking presence with a big heart and a creative soul. Whether it was knitting, crocheting, or writing her own songs on the guitar, Barbara had an undeniable passion for creativity. She was more than just smart, she was determined, always ready to take on new challenges, and she had a love for life that was contagious. Barbara wasn't just a regular student, she was the first in her family to attend college. She enrolled at Mt. Hood Community College, where she pursued a degree in business. Barbara dreamed of one day opening her own craft shop, and her family believed in her every step of the way. They knew she was capable of turning those dreams into reality. With her intelligence, her drive, and her natural creativity, the world was wide open for her. But tragically, that all came to an end one fateful night. Barbara's future was stolen from her far too soon, and the promise of her bright dreams would never be fulfilled. On the evening of January 15th, 1980, Barbara Mae Tucker, a 19-year-old college student, was like any other young person eager to continue her education. She was attending a night class at Mt. Hood Community College, located in Gresham, Oregon. It was a dark and rainy night, typical for the season, but Barbara wasn't going to let that stop her. She had big dreams, and every opportunity to learn brought her closer to achieving them. Little did she know, that night would be the last time she ever walked the halls of her college. As the night wore on, something went terribly wrong. Witnesses reported seeing Barbara running frantically from the woods near the campus. Covered in blood and mud, she was desperately trying to flag someone down for help. She must have been terrified, her future slipping away with every passing second. Several people saw her, but in a tragic twist, no one stopped. No one thought to lend a hand or call for help. They might not have understood the urgency, or perhaps they didn't know what to make of the sight before them. But whatever the reason, Barbara was left alone to face whatever had just happened. The next morning, the horrifying truth came to light. Barbara's lifeless body was found by a student, lying in a patch of bushes on campus. The police were immediately called, and it didn't take long for them to determine the brutal nature of the crime. Barbara had been beaten to death, her injuries severe and shocking. It was clear she had fought for her life, and it was equally clear that she had been sexually assaulted. Her belongings, a purse and some books, were found nearby, scattered carelessly on the ground. But the person responsible for this senseless violence was nowhere to be found. It was a crime that left a community shaken and a family broken. No one could understand how someone could do this to a young woman full of potential, and the fact that she had tried so desperately to seek help, only to be ignored, made it all the more tragic. Barbara's death wasn't just a random act of violence. It was a senseless tragedy that would haunt everyone involved for years to come. For decades, the case of Barbara Mae Tucker's murder remained a mystery. Despite the fact that there were several witnesses who had seen her running for help on the night of her death, the investigation was unable to move forward. The authorities were stuck. They had no solid leads, no concrete evidence to point them to a suspect. The DNA found at the scene was not enough to identify the killer, and with no clear physical descriptions of the attacker, the case began to grow cold. It was a frustrating time for the investigators, as every piece of evidence seemed to lead to a dead end. The lack of answers made the case feel impossible to crack, and with each passing year, the chances of finding the truth seemed to fade further. Barbara's family, too, was left in a state of despair. Her sisters, Susan and Alice, held on to hope, but over time, they began to accept the harsh reality that the murder might never be solved. For them, the passage of time only made the pain of losing their sister harder to bear. They continued to grieve for the young woman who had been taken from them, the woman who had never had the chance to grow old, start a family, or live the life she had dreamed of. It was almost as though Barbara was frozen in time, forever 19, her potential left unrealized, her future taken before it could even begin. Her family couldn't help but imagine what she would have been like as an adult. What kind of woman would she have become? What dreams would she have achieved? What relationships would she have built? These questions haunted her sisters for years. They couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that their sister's story was unfinished, and the answer, the truth, was somewhere out there, waiting to be found. As the years passed, life went on for Barbara's family, but the grief never fully left. They held on to memories of Barbara as she was vibrant, fun, and full of life. But the pain of not knowing who was responsible for taking her away lingered in their hearts. The world had moved on, but for them, Barbara would always be 19, a constant reminder of a future that could have been. For over 40 years, Barbara Mae Tucker's case remained unsolved, with no answers for her grieving family. However, in 2021, something incredible happened. Advances in DNA technology, along with the work of a dedicated genetic genealogist, would breathe new life into this long-cold case. The investigation took an unexpected turn when authorities turned to modern genetic techniques to help crack the mystery. C.C. Moore, a well-known genetic genealogist with a track record of solving cold cases, was brought in to assist. Moore specializes in using DNA to identify suspects in unsolved crimes, often utilizing a tool called the GEDmatch database. This database allows law enforcement to compare DNA from crime scenes with DNA uploaded by people who are searching for their own family roots. It was through this method that Moore and the team working on Barbara's case found the breakthrough they had been waiting for. When they entered the DNA from the crime scene into GEDmatch, a distant relative match appeared. This led them to Robert Plimpton, a man who had been a teenager at the time of Barbara's murder. Robert Plimpton, now 57 years old, had been just 16 when Barbara was killed. Despite being so young, he had never been considered a suspect until this moment. The revelation that he was connected to the crime through DNA was a shock to many, especially given how long the case had gone unsolved. It was hard to fathom how this teenager from years ago, now a middle-aged man, could suddenly be at the center of a case that had stumped authorities for decades. Was he really the right person? How could someone who was barely a teenager at the time of the murder have remained off the radar for so long? The authorities had finally found their suspect, but there were still many questions left unanswered. How had they missed him for so many years? What had happened in the years since Barbara's death that had kept Plimpton's name from being connected to the crime? The breakthrough brought a mix of emotions for Barbara's family. After decades of wondering who was responsible for their loved one's death, they now had a name. After all this time, was he really the person who had stolen Barbara's future? Once Robert Plimpton's name was connected to Barbara Mae Tucker's murder through DNA, investigators began to dig deeper into his past. What they discovered was unsettling. Plimpton's criminal history was not a clean one, and there were troubling signs that he had a history of violent behavior, even at a young age. By the time he was 16, he had already shown signs of being a troubled individual. In 1985, just a few years after Barbara's death, Plimpton was convicted of second-degree kidnapping. The conviction, while unrelated to Barbara's case, raised serious concerns about his pattern of behavior. He had been involved in criminal acts before, and now, decades later, he was being linked to a brutal murder. Despite these earlier criminal records, Plimpton had managed to fly under the radar for years. It wasn't until the 2021 breakthrough with DNA evidence that his name was brought up in connection with Barbara's murder. But it wasn't just his past that made Plimpton the key suspect. It was a piece of evidence that seemed almost trivial at first but would prove to be critical. After being placed under surveillance by detectives, Plimpton was observed spitting out a piece of chewing gum onto the ground. Detectives quickly seized the discarded gum, and it was tested against the DNA found at the crime scene. The result was a match. This small piece of gum, seemingly inconsequential in the moment, would become the key to solving a case that had remained cold for over 4 decades. It confirmed that the DNA found at the scene of Barbara's murder belonged to Robert Plimpton. It was a powerful moment for the investigators, who had spent years trying to find the one crucial link that could connect the dots. That gum, a simple and unexpected piece of evidence, sealed Plimpton's fate and solidified his connection to the crime. When Robert Plimpton was finally brought to trial for the brutal murder of Barbara Mae Tucker, the courtroom became the stage for a fierce battle of words and evidence. The prosecution, armed with solid DNA evidence that had been gathered decades after the crime, sought justice for Barbara and her grieving family. On the other side, Plimpton's defense team worked hard to cast doubt on his involvement, trying to create confusion and question the legitimacy of the charges. They argued that there was no clear, direct connection between Plimpton and Barbara. The defense tried to focus on discrepancies between the description of the man seen with Barbara that night and Plimpton's physical appearance. Several witnesses who had seen Barbara running for help and later spotted a man with her described the man as being taller than Plimpton, who stood at around 5 feet 8 inches. They claimed that this difference in height raised doubts about whether Plimpton was the person seen with Barbara. The defense also pointed out that there was no definitive evidence that Plimpton and Barbara had ever met before the night of her murder. They tried to weaken the prosecution's case by arguing that there were gaps in the evidence and that the DNA match alone wasn't enough to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Despite these attempts to create doubt, the prosecution held firm. They focused on the powerful DNA evidence that had linked Plimpton to the crime. The breakthrough came with the genetic genealogy work, where DNA collected from the crime scene in 1980 had been matched with Plimpton's through advanced forensic methods. This evidence was undeniable and irrefutable. The jury, after hearing the defense's arguments and the prosecution's compelling case, was tasked with a difficult but necessary decision. Was this the justice that Barbara had been denied for so many years? As the trial proceeded, the emotional toll on Barbara's family was evident. They had waited so long for answers, and now they sat in the courtroom, hoping that the justice system would finally bring them the closure they had sought for over 4 decades. Every moment was intense. Every word spoken seemed to add to the weight they had carried for so long. For Barbara's sisters, Susan and Alice, this was the culmination of a lifetime of heartache and uncertainty. It wasn't just about winning a case. It was about ensuring that Barbara's life had not been in vain, and that the person who had taken her future away would face the consequences. In 2024, after deliberating carefully on the evidence, the jury returned with a verdict. Robert Plimpton was found guilty of the murder of Barbara Mae Tucker. The courtroom erupted with emotion as the weight of the verdict sank in. Plimpton was sentenced to life in prison, a sentence that meant he would spend the rest of his life behind bars for the crime he had committed at just 16 years old. However, for Barbara's family, the question lingered. Was this justice too late? While they were relieved that Plimpton was finally being held accountable, the years of pain, unanswered questions, and the void left by Barbara's absence could never be fully filled. Barbara's family had lived with the belief that they might never see the day when the person responsible for her death would be brought to justice. Now, as they looked at the man convicted of her murder, they wondered if the years of pain had dulled the significance of the justice they had waited so long for. Barbara would never grow older, never see her dreams realized, and in many ways, her family had already been living with the loss for so long that the verdict, while significant, felt almost too late. Yet, despite these mixed emotions, the truth had finally come to light. When the verdict was read in 2024, there was a mixture of emotions in the courtroom. For Barbara's sisters, Susan and Alice, the relief of knowing that Robert Plimpton was finally convicted of her murder was undeniable, but it was also bittersweet. They had waited so long for this moment, and yet, the years of pain, sorrow, and unanswered questions could not be erased by a single conviction. Barbara, the sister they had lost all those years ago, would never grow older. She would always remain 19, forever young, forever full of promise. She will always be 19, Alice said, her voice breaking as she recalled the pain of missing out on seeing her sister's future unfold. Barbara would never have the chance to live her life, to chase her dreams, or to build the future she had worked so hard for. The reality of that loss was something that no amount of justice could ever take away. Barbara's family had lived in the shadow of her unsolved murder, wondering who could have done such a thing to a young woman full of life and promise. They had clung to the hope that one day the truth would be revealed, but even after the trial, the emotional toll was heavy. It was the final chapter in a painful journey, but there would never be a true sense of closure. The verdict, though satisfying, only served as a reminder of the years lost, of a young woman whose life was stolen before it had the chance to truly begin. The impact of the case was not limited to Barbara's family. It reverberated throughout the Portland community. For over 40 years, the residents of Portland had wondered what had happened to Barbara Tucker. The mystery had cast a long shadow over the community. Barbara had been a bright, beloved young woman, and her tragic death had left an indelible mark on the people who knew her. When the truth finally came to light, there was a collective sense of relief. People had followed the case over the years, and now they finally knew what had happened. However, many couldn't help but ask, why did it take so long for the truth to emerge? The investigation, which had started in 1980, had taken decades to crack, and many were left wondering why advances in DNA and genetic genealogy hadn't been used sooner. In the end, though, the question of time was something the community would have to live with. There was no way to get those lost years back. While the conviction of Robert Plimpton brought some form of justice, the question remained, at what cost? Barbara's family had waited for so long, endured so much pain, and finally, after decades of uncertainty, they had their answer. But it didn't bring Barbara back. No matter the verdict, no amount of justice could undo the loss they had felt for over 4 decades. The future they had imagined for her, the milestones she would never reach, remained just that. A dream, a possibility that would never be realized. In the aftermath of the trial, Barbara's family found some comfort in knowing that Plimpton would be held accountable for his actions. They could finally lay to rest the question that had haunted them for so long. Who was responsible for taking their sister's life? Yet, as they reflected on the years that had passed, they understood that the emotional cost was something they could never escape. Barbara's murder had stolen so much from them, and no court ruling, no matter how just, could ever return what had been taken. It was a reminder of the toll that time, grief, and unanswered questions can take on a family, a toll that, despite the legal resolution, would never fully heal. Looking back on the life of Barbara Mae Tucker, it's clear that the young woman who was taken from the world so tragically still holds a place in the hearts of those who knew her. Barbara's life was full of promise. She was bright, creative, and had big dreams for the future. Those who knew her well remember a vibrant soul who could light up any room with her presence. Her energy, her creativity, whether it was through her passion for knitting, crocheting, or her music, captured the essence of who she was. Barbara had a special way of making others feel seen and heard, and she had an undeniable spirit that drew people in. Her family, especially her sisters, Susan and Alice, will always carry her memory. For them, Barbara will forever be 19, never aging, never experiencing the milestones that so many of us take for granted. They lost the chance to watch their sister become the woman she was meant to be, building a career, starting a family, and living a life that was cut short. Yet, despite the pain of that loss, Barbara's legacy lives on through the memories of those she left behind. Her family has kept her spirit alive by telling her story, by sharing the laughter and joy she brought to their lives, and by keeping her dreams in their hearts. Though Barbara never had the chance to grow old, her memory continues to inspire those who knew her, and even those who have learned about her story through the years. Her passion for life, her creativity, and her unwavering determination live on. In the end, Barbara's legacy isn't just about what was lost, but about the ways in which her life, though short, left an impact on everyone around her. The heartache of her untimely death will always remain, but so too will the inspiration she provided through her zest for life, her artistry, and her dreams of a future she never got to see fulfilled. Barbara's case also serves as an important reminder of the broader implications for justice, especially when it comes to solving cold cases. The role of DNA and genetic genealogy has revolutionized the way law enforcement can approach unsolved crimes, bringing closure to victims' families who have waited decades for justice. Thanks to these advances, cases that once seemed hopeless can now be revisited and solved. Barbara's case is a testament to that power. It was a breakthrough that not only led to the identification of her killer, but also helped show just how far technology has come in making the truth more accessible. However, while it's a victory for justice, it's also a stark reminder of the heartbreak that comes with lost time. The decades that passed before Barbara's murderer was brought to justice are a heavy burden for her family, and the grief of those years cannot be undone. No amount of technology or scientific progress can erase the years spent in uncertainty. The fact that Barbara's murder went unsolved for so long will forever hang over her family, no matter how much justice is served now. Barbara Mae Tucker's story is a powerful reminder that no case is ever truly closed until justice is served. For decades, Barbara's family lived in the shadow of uncertainty, waiting for answers, hoping for justice. The case remained cold, unsolved, until a breakthrough moment in 2021 when advances in DNA technology helped bring the truth to light. This case shows us that justice is not a race against time, but a reminder that perseverance, coupled with evolving technology, can make the impossible possible. The technology that solved Barbara's case is constantly evolving. Today, genetic genealogy is playing a critical role in solving cold cases, helping law enforcement connect the dots in ways that were once unimaginable. Barbara's case was not an isolated incident. There are countless other families who are still waiting for the truth to emerge about the crimes that tore their lives apart. Some cases remain unsolved simply because they haven't yet benefited from the advances in science and technology that made Barbara's case solvable. We must continue to support the use of these advancements in law enforcement to bring justice to every victim, no matter how much time has passed. As we reflect on Barbara's case, we are left with an unsettling question: how many other cases are out there, still waiting for that breakthrough moment? How many families are still in the dark, just like Barbara's family was for so many years? It's a question that should drive all of us to action. As a society, we have a responsibility to ensure that justice is never delayed for those who deserve it. Barbara's case may have ended with the conviction of Robert Plimpton, but there are many others who have yet to see justice. We must continue to support efforts that allow investigators to work tirelessly on unsolved crimes, and we must ensure that technology is used to its fullest potential to give families the answers they deserve. At its core, Barbara's story is a testament to the resilience of her family and the power of hope. While the journey for justice was long, it was not in vain. For anyone facing a similar situation, whether it's a loved one who has been a victim of crime or anyone going through a similar struggle, Barbara's story should serve as a reminder: don't give up. Justice may take time, but the fight for it is worth every second. Every effort, every breakthrough, every small step forward brings us closer to the truth. If you or someone you know is a victim of a crime, keep fighting. Keep pushing for answers. The fight for justice can seem endless at times, but it's worth it. The families waiting for their day in court, like Barbara's family, remind us that persistence, technology, and a united community can eventually bring the truth to the surface. Keep advocating for justice, whether it's your own or someone else's, and never stop believing that the truth is out there, waiting to be uncovered.